In this French Connections, we'll take you to Paris's little-known 13th arrondissement.
It sits down in the southeastern corner of the city and was annexed into the capital in 1860 by Napoleon III.
Most Parisians know the 13th for its enormous Chinatown or its famous animation school, Les Gobelins.
But the area has a lot more to offer, as you'll find out in this French Connections.
We're here in the Butte-aux-Cailles, a Paris neighborhood that's often overlooked by tourists, but loved by the locals.
This historically working-class district has become a favorite for artists who have filled the area with beautiful street art.
The Butte-aux-Cailles is like a little village in the heart of the ultra-modern 13th arrondissement, and it has a history all its own.
La Butte-aux-Cailles, or Cailles Hill, once housed the 16th century vineyards and windmills of the Cailles family. It was a fenced-in village outside of Paris, overlooking the now underground Bièvre River. The primary activity in the 17th century here was mining limestone. Its hilly location made it the perfect spot to land the world's first ever manned hot air balloon. In 1783, aviation pioneer Jean-François Pilatre de Rosier became the first human to ever take flight in a montgolfière made of paper. The Butte-aux-Cailles was the site of a key battle in the Paris Commune of 1871. The Place de la Commune de Paris still stands today as a reminder of that civil insurrection. The Butte is also home to one of Paris's 3 spring water fountains and the city's first official swimming pool, inaugurated in the 1920s. Its Art Nouveau style and constant warm waters have made it a listed monument today. Other highlights of the 13th arrondissement include the Olympiade, a district of residential high-rises built in the 1970s and surrounding a massive elevated pedestrian esplanade. 11,000 people still live here today. That modern architecture is echoed in France's main library, the Bibliothèque nationale de France François Mitterrand, that was opened to the public in 1996. Its tall, angular towers overlooking the Seine River symbolize 4 open books.
The 13th arrondissement is also famous for an area called Les Gobelins.
That's named after the Gobelin brothers who established a fabric dyeing workshop here in the 14th century.
French kings fell in love with their incredible colors, particularly a prized scarlet, and were quick to turn it into a royal factory, making tapestries that still hang in Versailles today.
That love of color is also reflected in a more modern addition to the neighborhood. Les Gobelins is also home to one of the most famous animation schools in the world. Hello.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, how are you?
Chris Renaud, thank you so much for being with us today. You're a director and a producer, and you've made several hit animated films like Despicable Me and The Minions. You're originally from the States, but you decided to make them here in France. Why is that?
Well, when we were first starting the company, Illumination Entertainment, well now just Illumination, and partnered with Universal Pictures, the competition for talent in the United States was really acute. I mean, because we had DreamWorks, Pixar, Disney, Blue Sky. So France was a clear leader for us for several reasons. I would say one of the biggest, though, was the education system in France, particularly as it relates to art and animation, which is second to none. And so the students coming out of the schools here are world-class animators and artists. And that's not easily found. You know, it's just one of those things that, you know, and getting into not easily found, the other element of working here in France was, although yes, the United States and France are obviously very different culturally, we have enough similarities that, you know, we can kind of hit the ground running. I always, when we first came here, a lot of people from the U.S. animation world were like, oh, why are you going to Paris? Is it cheaper? And I'm like, have you been there? So it wasn't just like, oh, let's find a place that's inexpensive at all. It was like really like, where can we do this and where can we find the best artists and animators to work with?
And what is it about French animation itself that makes it so great?
I just think it's this dedication to artistic excellence. And I mean, it's that kind of classic thing, right? It's like, you know, I mean, look at the city, look at Paris, and like, I mean, almost everything, you know, for centuries, and that attention to detail. Now, sometimes it makes it difficult for us to get our quotas, but because there is a level of perfectionism that you find with the French art team that's just unparalleled. And of course, a lot of our team, it's interesting, they're comic book artists themselves. And so, you know, there's also that rich history of graphic novels here in France. And, you know, we'll have artists actually leave our team and go and produce their own comic. And because creating something, you know, that's really for them as an artist is something that's very, very important.
And the French are known for their particular work ethic. What is it like working with French animators?
They're very focused on the detail, the minutia. One of the best parts, I think, about our movies, given that there's so many characters, very often, particularly in the Minion films, but even in the Secret Life of Pets movies, you watch the background. Because, you know, we have a whole team of animators dedicated to what we call crowd animation. And there's all kinds of wonderful jokes and behaviors and fun elements that are not even in the foreground with the main characters, but are with the guys in the background. That, again, that's that dedication to excellence, making sure every corner of the frame there's something fun going on.
The Gobelins Animation School, where we are now, was started in the 70s, actually by the creators of the Asterix comics. They tapped into the Paris Chamber of Commerce because they wanted to develop their comic books into movies. Since then, the Gobelins has become one of the most famous animation schools in the world. Is there a different way of teaching animation here in France than there is in other countries?
And it's interesting, one of the premier animation schools in the United States, in California, Cal Arts, has a very similar history. Walt Disney started it as a way to train animators to produce his films. And of course, Disney, even when the Disney studio, there was one located here in Paris for many years, there's a lot of crossover. And some of the premier animators, even in the US, DreamWorks in particular, some of those premier animators are French and were trained here. So I couldn't speak to the specifics of the difference, but what I can tell you is there's a lot of similarities, just because you see all this cross-pollination going.
You have such a great badge of honor. You're one of the creators of the Minions. How French are the Minions, or how French is their language, would you say?
At this point, very. So I always think of their language as basically the Romance languages, Italian, Spanish, and French, and food. And so, you know, whether it's tikka masala or banana, but that's sort of the foundation of the Minion language at this point.
And so how would you say thank you in Minion?
I think it's bank you. I think it's just add a B. Yeah, bank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
For many Parisians, the 13th arrondissement is synonymous with Chinatown.
Now, unlike other big cities, Paris actually has several Asian neighborhoods scattered around the capital. The one in the 13th arrondissement is shaped like a piece of pie, and it's massive.
It's the biggest and best known in Paris, and here's a look at how it got that way. In the late 1800s, the area now known as Chinatown in the 13th was home to the Panard et Levasseur automobile factory that built the first Parisian car. By the 1930s, the factory had about 1,000 Asian immigrant workers who were among the first to live in the 13th. After the factory shut down in the 60s, the city of Paris razed the area, building the modern high-rise apartment blocks still present today. This new housing was too expensive for poor Parisians, and wealthier ones found it too modern for their liking, but it was perfect for the waves of Southeast Asian refugees fleeing from violence in former colonies, like the war in Vietnam or the Khmer Rouge genocide in Cambodia.
Ça a été vraiment le quartier du renouveau, de la Renaissance, et ils ont voulu rester ici. En plus, c'était un quartier qui était en construction. Et justement, il y avait ce parallèle entre la construction de leur vie et la construction du quartier. Donc en fait, le quartier, il a évolué en même temps que les Asiatiques qui sont arrivés en France.
A new influx of immigrants moved in from China in the 1980s, looking for more economic prosperity and democracy. Today, this part of the 13th makes up the biggest Chinatown in Europe. Chinese and Vietnamese businesses dominate the district, but it still has an amazingly diverse mix of Asian cultures.
你好，ជំរាបសួរ
Bonjour. The 13th is also home to fantastic restaurants, and many of the largest importers of Asian products in Paris can be found here as well, including the massive Tong Frères shops and delis owned by the Tang brothers, originally from Laos. The area is also home to two major Buddhist temples, tucked away far beneath the towers above.
On dit que les temples sont cachés. Je ne dirais pas qu'ils sont cachés, je dirais plutôt qu'ils ne sont pas visibles. Ce qui n'est pas tout à fait la même chose. Caché, ça sous-entendrait que c'est volontaire. Alors que les temples du quartier ne sont pas à même le trottoir. Je pense que c'est pour des raisons budgétaires.
This part of the 13th is also home to the annual Lunar New Year Parade. It's a tradition that's been in place since the 1980s, carried on by second and third generation Asian French locals and their children.
Pour moi, je trouve que c'est génial parce qu'en fait, ça leur permet d'avoir deux cultures, de pouvoir en fait d'en tirer profit en fait des deux cultures, le bon de chaque côté, que ce soit français ou vietnamien.
We can't wrap up a show about Paris's 13th arrondissement without sharing with you our favorite story about why the 13th became the 13th.
Well, before the capital expanded from 12 to 20 arrondissements in 1860, people used to joke that unwed couples living in Sin were living in the 13th arrondissement.
That meant that the wealthy residents of Western Paris were very unhappy to find out that in the new distribution of districts, they were about to become the 13th.
And they complained so much that the city actually changed its plan, laying out the current design of the capital where the arrondissements spiral out, landing the 13th down here in the southeastern part of the city and those bourgeois complainers up in the 16th.
The 16th is still a pretty great area to check out, and we'll be sure to do that in an upcoming show.
And if you have any questions, you can reach out at Villeminot, and we'll see you soon for another episode of French Connections.